and welcome to Pod Street, Writing WA's podcast, regular podcast. And my guest today is Katie Kell, author. I'm Leslie Rees, chair of Writing WA. Katie has written 3 books, her young adult novels, Juice in 2000 and Mama's Trippin' in 2006, and Chloe, her extraordinary book about the famous Melbourne nude in 2024, which Writing WA was privileged to launch here at the State Library. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Leslie.
Chloe, I think we just spend the first part of this session talking about Chloe, and then I want to go on to what you're doing now, which is working on a memoir of the research that came out of both Chloe and Mama's Tripping, which is probably one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard, and I'm looking forward to the publication already. So Chloe, in Chloe, you reimagine the volatile history of the beautiful and enigmatic young woman, Marie, immortalised in one of Australia's most iconic paintings, which was painted in Paris, 1875
That's
by
right.
Lefebvre, the gorgeous nude. And she was brought to the Young and Jackson Hotel in Melbourne, of all places, in 1909, and where she's been ever since, and where you had your Melbourne launch of the book. So let's spend the first part of this podcast talking about what led you to the story of Chloe and how you decided then to weave together a very intricate story going backwards and forwards between Paris in the 1870s and Victoria in the early 20th century. Could you do that for us, please?
Sure. Yeah, well, so it all sounds a little bit airy-fairy, but actually the inspiration for Chloe came from a dream, and it was a life-changing dream. It was so vivid, and it would not leave me. And in the dream, I saw myself sitting in a very antiquarian chair. I was holding a heavy volume, and when I turned the cover over, I saw on the cover the title, and it was actually Chloe's Child. And then I looked down and I saw the name of the author was my name.
It's wonderful.
I thought, this is very strange.
I love this.
And it was one of those sort of almost lucid dreams where you're almost kind of aware you're dreaming. It was very strange. I was very sleep deprived at the moment at that particular time. Then I opened the volume, and the pages fell open, and a sulphur-crested cockatoo flew down and landed on the pages of this book, at which point this very dense, tangled kind of forest kind of sprung up all around me, and I woke up. And it was really strange. I'd never had a dream like this before. I do have vivid dreams, and I'll talk more about that in connection with the other story. But it would not leave me, and I was looking after my then very youngest daughter, Angelina, and the Chloe was what really stuck with me. And the fact this sulphur-crested cockatoo, it felt like this must be a very Australian story. And then as the morning went on, I didn't know anyone called Chloe, and then all of a sudden the penny dropped, and I remembered a story I'd been told many, many years before by a man who was Neil Watson, who was to become my first husband. And he had returned from Melbourne, and I was a young art student at the time, and I was pontificating and telling him all about my fabulous art studies and that I'm doing these paintings. And he said to me, you must go and see Chloe. And then he told me a few stories about Chloe, about this amazing nude. And I had initially thought it was just a sort of fairly saucy painting being in a pub in Young and Jackson's. And he got quite indignant and said, no, this is a painting that should be in the gallery. It looks like it could belong in the Louvre. And he also shared another very interesting aspect of Chloe's story, and that was that it was a working class bar where the painting was being displayed, and that anyone who showed any disrespect to that painting got into all sorts of trouble. So the men that were drinking there were actually very, very attached and protective of Chloe. So I thought, I think this is the Chloe that I'm supposed to learn about. And so I started doing my Googling and whatever, and immediately found the image. And as soon as I saw her face, it wasn't the nude aspect, it was that young woman's face that just captured me. And I thought, I need to learn this girl's story and what has actually happened to her.
So she's in Paris, she's been painted by Lefebvre. And then we have Australia.
Yes.
on the wall, World War One.
Well, yes.
Tell us how you worked that out, because I mean, we don't have a lot of time to talk about Chloe, but I think we need to in terms of setting the scene for the next part of what we're going to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the very interesting things I quickly learned about Chloe was her significance to Australian servicemen, and that there was this long-held tradition that had begun during World War One of soldiers going and having a drink with Chloe, a good luck drink with Chloe, before they headed off to war. And then the idea was that when they returned, they would come and have a drink with Chloe when they got back. And it makes a lot of sense because where the pub, Young and Jackson's, is situated is directly across the road from Flinders Street Railway Station in Melbourne. So it would have been a very common drop-off point for young soldiers and older soldiers as well to meet. And so I wanted to honour that story. It's a very important story in terms of Australian military history. So I thought we really do need to have some soldiers who have a really interesting relationship with this painting. And at the same time, I had discovered this, well, I knew about my colonial history, was based in southern Victoria. So I thought, yes, let's set that Australian story in southwestern Victoria, and we will have our young soldiers come from there. And I thought if the story began in World War One, that was the place, that was the time to set that thread. Yeah.
And it worked wonderfully. And I mean, you had so much information. You could have written a non-fiction book, but you chose to imagine her life, Murray's life, aka Chloe. And in doing so, you brought all these threads together, which was, and it worked brilliantly. I mean, it's a page turner, a beautiful literary page turner.
Thank you.
But I'd like to get on now, because always with a great writer, we always ask what next. And when you started telling me what you were working on, what you'd been involved in, it was just quite overwhelming for me listening to it and then delving into it. And I want to go on to that now, because you're writing a memoir. I hope it doesn't take as long as Chloe.
No, I think this will come together quite quickly. I've done all the research.
Yes. Yeah. And Angelina is now a grown young woman.
She's now 22.
I know, and an artist in her own right.
Yeah.
So if we move on to this extraordinary voyage of discovery that you've been on, you wrote a piece for Insight. You went on. You did a program on Insight. And you went to the. Do we call it the Uruk Justice Commission?
That's correct, Uruk Justice Commission.
The Uruk Justice Commission. Yeah. So, let's talk a little bit about that. In the SBS Insight story, you say, and I'm going to quote you, "My ancestors' actions led to atrocities against Indigenous people. I want to tell the truth." And if we go on from that, it comes out that you, Katie, are a fourth-generation descendant of the sea captain James Donaldson Liddell, whose actions led to violence against the Gunditjmara people. When you discovered this, quote, "You felt ashamed but refused to be ruled by guilt." Such a powerful commentary. So, Katie, how did your research for Mama's Trippin and Chloe lead you to this discovery? And we'll talk about the impact on you later.
Sure. It's almost felt, the more I think about it, it's almost felt like this is a story I was meant to discover. I've been looking back at a lot of other things I'd written even prior to that, and they all have the same theme about a displaced people, colonisation and the impact of that. So it's sort of always been there. When I was researching Mama's Trippin, I was actually looking at the Moriori people, and I actually discovered I had cousins who were Moriori. Now, the Moriori is a race that was also believed to be extinct in Aotearoa, actually on the Chatham Islands, Rekahu. And that's a very complicated story of a very different type of invasion and enslavement, which we can't really go into at the moment. No. But as part of that research, I discovered that my ancestor was a whaler and a sealer, and that he had actually been actively sealing in that area. And that was something that also did have a big impact on the Indigenous people there, because they relied very heavily on the seals. So that was one aspect. And at the same time, I was doing the research for Chloe, and then I remembered these stories that my grandmother had told me about our illustrious sea captain who had taken the first plough to Victoria, along with the first settlers. And it was told to us because we were actually leaving Scotland. It was like a return to Australia. So this was a way, I think, of comforting us and saying, you really belong here. This is going to be your home. We have this incredible heritage. And there was so much pride, but there was never any mention about the Aboriginal Australians from that region in any of these stories. So I was aware of that. So I started doing a lot more digging and discovered, yes, this was actually true. At the same time, when I was researching Mama's trip, and still because it wasn't finished, I remembered I was coming across stories about the Taranaki Maori, which was really important to Mama's trip, because the Taranaki Maori invaded Rekahu, the Chatham Islands, and that was a devastating event. So I called my mum because I remembered this song she used to sing to us when we were children about her great-grandma, her great-great-grandma being born on Taranaki Harbour. And we just thought it was just a song that Mum had made up because she was always singing. And so I rang up and said, Mum, that story. And I said, was that true? Was your great-grandmama born in Taranaki? And she said, yes. She said she was born on board a ship. And I said, could this have something to do with our sea captain? And she said, absolutely. She was the daughter of Captain Liddell. And he at that time was in New Zealand, trading up and down the coast and backwards and forwards to New South Wales. So a lot of these stories have come to me through the women in our family. And I'm so grateful that they shared these stories, because I talked to some of my siblings and they've no recollection, particularly the younger ones. They don't know much about this, but fortunately it made an impression on me. So I was able to then start doing the research.
Well, you're the writer and the researcher in the family.
That's true. Yeah.
So you discover this, and, he's this hero ancestor of yours, and then you delve in and you find out what he was responsible for.
Absolutely. And that was through another female, the same one that was born on Taranaki Harbour, Janet Liddell, who was beautifully literate. She was the daughter of Captain James Liddell, and she felt very strongly that her father's role in the so-called, I call it the so-called settlement of Victoria, had not been fully acknowledged, because she had access to his memoranda, and she had discovered that he was actually the person that identified Portland.
With pride.
With pride. So she wrote this very powerful piece in response to a piece by, you've probably heard of the Vagabond, who used to write all sorts of interesting bits and pieces to The Age and all the different newspapers. And he had said something which had bothered her, and she wanted to challenge that and say, no, it was actually my father who dug up the first sod of soil and took it to show Thomas Henty, the father of Edward Henty, who was the first one to settle there.
Yeah.
And that's what I put, sort of the working title of the book I'm working on, is One Sod of Stolen Soil, which I think kind of sums up a little bit of what's happened.
So Liddell was responsible for really the first settlement in Victoria.
If you look at it that way, yeah.
The first settlement, not legal, obviously, in terms of even the British Crown, but that's what he did.
Yeah, well, it was theft at the time.
It was still theft at the time,
yeah.
Which then led to so many of the atrocities.
Absolutely, to the frontier wars.
The frontier wars in that state. Katie, how did you come to write that first article for the SBS, that article, the written one, as opposed to going on the program?
That came after, actually. That came after the program.
It came after. I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
So how did they How did you come to be on Insight then? Because that was extraordinary, very courageous, very strong. How did you did you contact them? Did they? How did that come about?
No. What happened was they must have seen, perhaps seen the live stream of the Europe Justice Commission descendants hearing. There was 3 of us who were non-Indigenous who gave a submission, and they were all really powerful submissions where people were telling truth about what had really happened. And that is still available online. So there's been quite a bit of advertising by URIC that these videos are available for people to view. It's getting a lot of publicity. When I did the submission, Tony Wright, who is a wonderful journalist who writes for The Age, did a special story on that particular descendants hearing, and he talked a lot about what I talked about during my submission.
So just to be clear, the Justice Commission, which is so powerful, they had a special day for non-Indigenous descendants of early colonial figures. And there were some very, very distressing stories there that came out, his involvement in the abandonment of that Indigenous woman.
That's right.
A horrible, horrible story. And in your incredibly moving and forceful evidence, you express the wish that there could be changes to the school curriculum in Victoria to help non-Indigenous Australians understand the state's violent past and face up to it with, quote, honest and critical eyes. You went on to say, while these stories are hidden and not shared and the truth is denied, how can you call yourself a nation in this day and age? Wow.
I think it's true.
Well, of course.
Yeah, I think it's true. And I think if we want to be seen as a mature nation, an honest nation, I think we all have to face up to this. And I think it is beginning. I mean, the Truth Telling Commission in Victoria has been incredibly powerful, but like many of these things already, a lot of the assurances that have been coming, from various political figures are not necessarily coming to fruition, certainly not as quickly as is needed.
Tragically, one of the first acts of the new Queensland Premier was to cancel the Queensland Truth Telling Commission. It's all been put on hold.
Has that been put on hold? I hadn't seen that. I mean, that's just absolutely
just been put on hold.
So disappointing.
And I mean, your words about the school curriculum we obviously need throughout Australia, not just in Victoria. All states have these need for truth telling. The Insight SBS episode, Recognising Our Past, was very strong too. I mean, the way you spoke. And on this Truth Commission, what impact has it had on you? I mean, finding out all of this and then becoming a very public figure. Well, that's a hard road. You've got a beautiful family, a fabulous husband, Dave, very busy life, and now you're a very public figure, not just as an author, but really as an advocate for justice and truth telling.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's a very good question because, I hadn't really had time to process it very much because this all unfolded so quickly. And I feel there's a big responsibility. A comment was put up following the SBS article that was published, and it was just lies and nonsense that this person put up. And that was a bit confronting. So I just contacted Facebook and told them, this is misinformation. Can you please take it down? And they did.
Good, well done.
So that was good because, we don't need that now. We don't need this nonsense that's just so often being spread and effectively lies. And I'm about truth telling, so I don't really want to have anyone muddying the waters at the moment. And I think other than that, I've had a couple of people have contacted me, like I say, after seeing the thing, and they're just interested in learning more, which is really, really helpful.
And the family?
The family have been incredibly well. I can only talk about my immediate family.
Yes.
There may well be people I would imagine. I had a beautiful cousin who has passed away, Ray Liddell, who I must pay tribute to because he had done an enormous amount of research into Liddell and his activities, particularly his shipping activities, which have been hugely helpful. But Ray was very proud of Captain Liddell, and I don't think he had any idea at all about the impact on the Gunditjmara people at all. So perhaps people from Ray's family in Aotearoa may have some issues with this, but from what the sense I'm getting is people want this story, they want the truth. And,
and at the time,
yeah,
it was, I hate the word, but it was the norm.
It certainly wasn't unusual, put it that way.
Well, that's probably a better way of putting it. But it happened throughout in so many different ways.
And very closely following what had happened in Tasmania within a couple of years, so this was the next stage. So I think a lot of things that had been happening in Tasmania were then being translated to what happened on the frontier in
New South Wales, the Mile Creek. There's so much there.
He was also in WA as well, my ancestor as well.
Was he?
Yeah, he actually transported Manyat and Gallipert to Whadjuk Noongar men up to the Swan River colony to meet Yagan and Midjaguru. That was a more positive story.
This story gets bigger by the moment, Katie. So, Katie, you're going to write this memoir. Have you had interest from your publisher?
I've had a conversation with my publisher. I can't say there's no contracts being put in place or anything like that at this stage, but they are interested in seeing a proposal. So we'll just see where it goes from there.
So where are you at now with the whole project?
I'm just kind of developing something that makes a bit of sense in how I'm going to approach this. The structure and, how I see it will unfold and as a story and as something I hope that will be engaging and people will connect with in a way that doesn't alienate readers, so they can actually, that it will be something that Aboriginal Australians, non-Indigenous Australians can read and see there is truth there and hopefully embrace this in a way of moving forward.
Well, knowing you, Katie, you will achieve this and we will all look forward to reading it, particularly me, and hopefully launching it back here at Writing WA again.
That would be nice.
And I think, I'd like to congratulate you not just on your writing but on your perseverance. And you may not think of it as courage to go public in the way you have, but I certainly do, because so many people just keep quiet about things that are wrong. And truth-telling, as you say, is the only way this country is going to grow up. So thank you so much, Katie, and best of luck with this wonderful memoir.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you so much.